We don't talk about the old war. Not anymore. We talk about the Long Armistice, the unsettled peace, the 80-year quiet that has settled over the continent like a fine layer of dust on forgotten furniture. The year 2000 of the Fourth Age, when a monstrous horde boiled out of the blighted lands in a global tide of Fang and chitin, is a story for grandfathers, a chapter in a history book. The horror has been rendered inert, academic. The world rebuilt itself, polishing the scars on its cities until they looked like monuments. But a wound that deep doesn't heal. It just waits. In the royal capital of Ethel, Princess Aris was a part of that polished veneer. To the people, she was the realm's jewel, second in line for the throne, impossibly beautiful, unerringly kind. But at 18, she was also dying. It was a slow, elegant decay, a disease without a name that doctors attributed to the weak bloodline of a royal house that had paid for its power in constitutions. A tremor lived in her hands, a delicate flutter she concealed by clasping them in her lap. A weariness had set into her bones that no amount of sleep could touch. She felt, in the quiet moments of the night, like a specimen in a glass box, a perfect, intricate seashell from which the living creature had already wasted away. She was becoming a fossil in real time. Her pain was a secret she kept with the same rigor a monk keeps his vows. Her role, as defined by her brother, Prince Valerus, was to be a filter for the kingdom's anxieties. He, the crown prince, was all steel and sharp edges, a man who saw the court as a machine to be operated. Aris was its human component, a worried minister, a grieving noblewoman, a petitioner trembling with fear. Valerus would guide them to his sister with a consoling hand on their shoulder. "Go to Aris," he'd say, his voice a balm. "She will understand. She will ease your heart." And she would. People would pour their troubles into her, their emotional toxins, their psychic runoff. She would listen, absorb it all, and leave them feeling cleansed, lighter. She was a living bioremediator. And with every soul she purified, the anoxic dead zone inside her grew. The court praised her strength, her boundless compassion. They did not see the eutrophication of her spirit, the slow suffocation happening just beneath the serene surface. Valerus, of course, saw it all. He was the architect of this process, the one who kept adding the nutrients of others' despair to her water, knowing that the resulting bloom would eventually kill her. He was poisoning her with goodness. Sometimes, when the pain was a sharp, physical thing behind her ribs, her mind would drift back 10 years. To the cacophony of the siege, to the smell of stone and flesh burning together. She wasn't a princess then, just a terrified 8-year-old girl, her hand clutched by a royal guard as they fled through a burning side chapel. In the shadow of a crumbling archway, cowering from the hulking shape of a Gornok scuttler, she'd seen him. A boy, no older than she was, with a face so caked in soot and grime it was a grey mask. His eyes, though, were a shocking, impossible blue, reflecting the flames around them with a chilling stillness. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was just watching. Waiting. She'd pulled away from her guard, dug a piece of hard bread from a pocket, her ration for the day, and pushed it into the boy's hand. He took it without a word, his gaze never leaving the monster as it was finally brought down by a phalanx of dwarven pikes. The guard had pulled her away then, back into the chaos. She never saw the boy again. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. And she could never have known that in that quiet, desperate act of kindness, she had preserved the single deadliest seed on the continent. She had just saved the boy who would, a decade later, be known only as the Bloody Commander. And news had just arrived from the northern marches. After 10 years of silence, he was coming home. The war had redrawn the map, not of territories, but of trust. Before the siege, the races of the continent kept to themselves, wrapped in the comfortable blanket of their ancient mistrusts. The elves of the verdant spire looked down from their forest canopy with aloof pity. The dwarfs of the iron-deep citadels delved ever deeper, content with stone and forge song. And humans, prolific and ambitious, built their sprawling cities on the open plains, believing their numbers were their greatest strength. All were born with an inner spark, a potential for power that, with training, manifested in a way unique to their race. Those without the spark lived lives of quiet normalcy, while the gifted were conscripted into the endless readiness for war, a war they assumed would be against each other. The global onslaught of the monsters had shattered that assumption. The monsters were not a mindless horde. They were a race unto themselves, a people of the blighted lands whose power was primal manifestation, the horrific ability to warp their own flesh into weapons, to grow chitinous armor, spit acid, or birth shrieking abominations from their own bodies. Against this tide of living nightmare, individual strength was meaningless. Survival demanded unity. And so, the Grand Pact was forged in fire and desperation. The races combined their might. The elves wielded viriditas, the power to command life itself, weaving thorns into barricades thick as fortress walls, and withering the monsters' living siege engines into dust. The dwarfs, with their innate lithokinesis, didn't just move stone. They sensed the bedrock of the world, raising fortifications in an hour that would take humans a decade to build, and collapsing the ground beneath the enemy's feet. And humanity brought their signature power, affinity. A versatile, unpredictable gift, it allowed them to influence the raw elements. A soldier with a fire affinity could turn an arrow into an incendiary bolt. A tactician with a wind affinity could read the currents to predict enemy movements. This fragile, necessary alliance was what had held the continent together for the 10 years since the armistice was signed. It was a coalition built to hunt down and eradicate the last pockets of monstrous resistance, festering in the dark corners of the world. And at the very tip of the Pact's deadliest spear was the boy Aris had fed in the chapel. The official announcement of his return came during a formal council session. Lord Commander Valerus, Aris's brother, a man whose ice affinity was more a state of being than a power, read the dispatch with a carefully neutral expression. The 8th Expeditionary Legion, under the command of General Kalen, has successfully purged the weeping fen of its broodmother. The Legion is returning to Ethel for replenishment and reassignment. A murmur went through the assembled nobles. General Kalen, the bloody commander, the diademist, as the elven intelligence officers called him, for his plans were like an algal bloom. They began with a single, invisible cell, and ended with the silent death of an entire ecosystem. No one knew his affinity. He fought with tactics, with poison, with fear, with a patience that was utterly inhuman. He was the Pact's most terrible and effective weapon. Aris watched her brother's face. For the first time in a long time, she saw a flicker of something in his icy composure. Not fear, not joy. It was the sharp, acquisitive gleam of a chess master seeing an impossibly powerful, impossibly dangerous piece return to the board. And he was already calculating how to use it.